Open your refrigerator door. Go ahead, picture it. That cold light spills out, a quiet hum you never really notice, a jug of milk still fresh, leftovers from 3 days ago, a whole drawer of crisp green vegetables. You grab what you want, close the door, and forget the thing exists. But for almost all of human history, that cold box was a miracle nobody had. Food did not politely wait for you. It rotted, it soured, it turned dangerous, and it did all of that fast. So how did people actually live before the refrigerator? The answer is a strange and wonderful story of frozen lakes, sawdust, dripping wooden boxes, and a man who climbed your stairs every single morning carrying a heavy block of winter. Start with the enemy, because the enemy is time. The bacteria that spoil food multiply fastest in warm air, leave a fresh fish on a summer table, and within a few hours it begins to turn. Milk drawn at sunrise could be sour by supper. A side of meat had to be eaten quickly, or it was simply lost. For thousands of years, the great problem in every kitchen was not only finding food but keeping it. Harvest gave you far too much at once, then winter gave you almost nothing, and there was no gentle way to carry the good days across to the hungry ones. So people got clever. They learned to fight rot with salt, with smoke with fire, and with the plain cold of the earth. And the wish for cold is far older than you might think. Long before Boston and its ice ships, ancient people were already chasing it. In Persia, more than 2,000 years ago, engineers built tall dome structures called yakals, where they stored winter ice and even snow deep into the desert summer. In ancient China, crews cut ice from rivers and packed it into deep pits filled with straw. Wealthy Romans sent runners up into the mountains to bring back snow, packed it in cellars, and used it to chill their wine and their food. For the rich and powerful, cold had always been a rare and expensive luxury. What changed later was turning that luxury into something an ordinary family could actually have. Salt was the first great weapon. Salt pulls the water out of meat and fish, and without water, the bacteria cannot grow. Whole economies were built on salted cod and salted pork, packed tight in wooden barrels, stiff as boards and lasting for months. Sailors crossed oceans on it. Armies marched on it. Then came smoke. Hang a ham or a fish over a slow smoldering fire, and the smoke both dries the meat and coats it in natural preservatives. A smokehouse in the yard meant bacon and hams that lasted through the cold season. People dried fruit in the sun, turned cucumbers into pickles in vinegar and brine, buried eggs in salt, and boiled fruit with heaps of sugar into jam. There was fermenting too, turning cabbage into sauerkraut and milk into long-lasting cheese, letting friendly microbes crowd out the harmful ones. Butter was washed and heavily salted so it would keep. Fresh grapes were dried into raisins, and plums into prunes, sweet and safe for months. Every one of these tricks was really the same trick. Make the food a place where rot cannot live. Yet all of it changed the food itself. The winter diet was heavy with salty, smoky, pickled, and dried things, and a crisp, fresh vegetable in the cold months was a rare and precious thing. But sometimes you did not want to salt or smoke your food. Sometimes you just wanted to keep it cool and fresh for a few days. The way we do now, for that, people reached for the ground itself. A few feet below the surface, the earth stays cool and steady all year. So families dug root cellars. A root cellar was a small underground room or a mound of earth with a door where potatoes, carrots, apples, onions, and turnips could sit through winter without freezing or spoiling. Near a stream, people built something even cleverer called a springhouse. Cold spring water ran right across the floor, and crocks of milk, butter, and cream sat in that running water, staying cool as the stream itself. It was the closest thing to a refrigerator the world had, and it was made of nothing but stone and water. Still, none of this could give you real, lasting cold in the middle of July. For that, people needed ice. And here the story turns genuinely amazing. In the frozen north, winter covered lakes and ponds with thick sheets of solid ice. For most of history, that ice just melted away every spring. Useless. Then a young man from Boston named Frederick Tudor looked at a frozen pond and saw a fortune. In 1806, he did something people thought was insane. He cut ice out of a New England lake, packed it into the hold of a ship, and sailed it all the way to the hot island of Martinique to sell. People laughed at him. They called him the Ice King as a joke. Much of that first cargo melted, and he lost money for years. But Tudor did not quit, and he solved the puzzle piece by piece. The secret turned out to be insulation. He discovered that sawdust, the waste from sawmills, was a superb blanket for ice. Packed thick around the blocks, sawdust trapped the cold and kept the ice from melting for months. With that one trick, the whole idea worked. Soon ships were carrying New England ice to the American South, to the Caribbean, to South America, and astonishingly, all the way to Calcutta in India, a voyage of 4 months, arriving with much of the ice still solid. A frozen pond in Massachusetts was cooling drinks on the far side of the planet. By the middle of the century, the ice trade had become an enormous business. Every winter, hundreds of thousands of tons of ice were carved from northern lakes and rivers and shipped around the world. Whole towns lived off the harvest, and a warm winter that gave thin ice could spark real panic and rising prices, an event people actually called an ice famine. Now think about how that ice was actually gathered, because it was brutal, freezing work. In the deep of winter, crews went out onto the frozen lakes. First, they scraped the snow off the surface. Then, using horse-drawn cutters and long saws, they scored the ice into a giant checkerboard grid. Men with saws and iron bars broke the blocks free, each one heavy and slick, and floated them down open channels of dark water toward the shore. Every block might weigh a couple hundred pounds. The men worked in bitter cold on a surface that could crack and drop a person into freezing water in a heartbeat. Even the famous writer Henry David Thoreau watched crews harvest ice from his beloved Walden Pond and marveled that its cold water would end up in distant cities and countries. The blocks were dragged up ramps into giant ice houses on the shore, huge wooden barns with double walls packed with sawdust. Stacked inside, insulated from the summer heat, the ice could wait out the warm months, ready to be sold. From these ice houses, the blocks traveled by train and by wagon into the growing cities. And this is where the ice finally reached ordinary homes through a piece of furniture we have almost completely forgotten, the icebox. The icebox was not a machine at all, and it had no electricity and no moving parts. It was a wooden cabinet, usually oak, lined on the inside with tin or zinc, with a layer of insulation like cork or sawdust in the walls. Up top sat a compartment for a block of ice. Below it were shelves for food. Cold air from the ice sank down over the food, keeping the whole cabinet chilly, while the melting ice dripped down through a pipe into a shallow pan underneath. Emptying that drip pan before it overflowed was a daily chore, and many a kitchen floor was flooded by a pan somebody forgot. Families kept butter, milk, and meat fresh for days this way, so long as the ice held. But of course the ice was always melting, which meant it had to be replaced again and again. And that created one of the most familiar figures of the age, the Iceman. The Iceman was a fixture of daily life for generations. He drove a horse-drawn wagon loaded with dripping blocks of ice, moving down the street on a regular route. To tell him how much you needed, you put a printed card in your front window. The card had different numbers on its 4 sides, such as 25, 50, 75, and 100 pounds. You simply turned the card so the amount you wanted faced the street, and the Iceman knew at a glance exactly how big a block to carry up. He would chip a block down to size with an ice pick, grab it with a pair of sharp iron tongs, heave it onto his leathered and shouldered back, and haul it straight into your kitchen, dropping it neatly into the top of your icebox. For children, the Iceman's wagon was pure summer magic. As he cut and chipped the big blocks, small slivers and chips of clean ice went flying, and kids would trail the wagon down the block, begging for a piece to suck on in the heat. In a world without air conditioning, a free chunk of ice on a blazing afternoon was a genuine treasure. The Iceman knew everyone on his route, and he was as much a part of the neighborhood as the milkman or the postman. But the days of the Iceman were numbered, because inventors had been chasing a bolder dream, a box that made its own cold, with no ice, no dripping, and no delivery. The science had been understood for a while. When certain liquids evaporate into gas, they pull heat out of their surroundings and leave them cold. Build a machine that compresses a gas, then lets it expand and evaporate over and over in a loop, and you can pump heat out of a sealed box endlessly. Early versions of this were big, noisy, industrial machines used to make ice in factories and to cool breweries and meatpacking plants. Slowly, engineers shrank the machine down to fit a home. In 1913, a device called the Dommel became one of the first refrigerators sold for the household. In 1918, the Kelvinator arrived, and the Frigidaire brand grew so popular that for years, people called any refrigerator a Frigidaire. Electric released its famous monitor top model, with the whirring machinery mounted in a round drum on top, and it sold by the hundreds of thousands. These early units were expensive, often costing more than a car, but the price fell year after year. By the 1930s and 1940s, the electric refrigerator marched into kitchen after kitchen, and the icebox, the drip pan, and the friendly Iceman slowly faded into memory. and the fridge did far more than save us a trip to the market. Reliable cold changed how people ate and how long they lived. Fresh milk could finally be kept safely for children, instead of turning dangerous in a warm kitchen. Meat and fish could travel from farm and coast into the cities without spoiling on the way. Families could keep leftovers, waste less, and eat a wider, healthier variety of food all year round. The humble cold box quietly made food safer and cheaper for millions of ordinary people. So the next time you open your refrigerator without a single thought, pause for just one moment. That effortless cold is one of the quiet miracles of modern life. Behind it stand centuries of salted barrels and smoky hams, of dark root cellars and cold springhouses, of men sawing blocks from frozen lakes in the killing cold, and of an iceman climbing your stairs with winter on his shoulder. We solved one of humanity's oldest problems, the simple, stubborn spoiling of food, and then we tucked that victory into a humming box in the corner, and forgot it was ever hard. That is how life was before the refrigerator. And honestly, it makes that cold light look like the wonder it truly is.